Guild Wars Sea of Sorrows. Chapter 13. She's a restless sloop with a six-armed maid, a dancing on her prow. Her brassy cannons crease the sea. But the weathers chased her down, her compass spins, and her captain screams, and the crew's all dead and drowned. Weather the storm. We're almost out of coal for the engine, our water supplies are low, and the men are beginning to rumble about pay. We unloaded our cargo at Port Stalwart, but never had time to pick up the gold, what with that hanging gallows thing going on. Sycox sat with his back to the Pride's mast, dealing cards from a worn deck. He swept up a share in his paw and laid the deck down between the players. We also need to do something about. He jerked one clawed thumb toward their passengers. Them. I say, Virid and Henst sat together on the quarterdeck. Throughout the voyage, the three had kept their distance from the men and women working on the Pride. They'd pitched in where they could, but without relish, and several small arguments had cropped up between Isai's sword-wielding companion and members of Kobaya's crew. Although few involved spoke about the reason for such scuffles, Kobaya could guess what was causing them. Henst made no secret of his Ascalonian lineage, or his hatred of the Char. Kobaya rested in the narrow shade of the Pride's mainsail. They were nearly a week out of Port Stalwart, with no sign of the dead ships since the Harbinger's red sails had faded into the distance 3 days before. Where do we take them? Kobaya drew a card from the deck and shuffled it into his hand. Port Stalwart is gone. Port Noble's still standing, but King Bade of Criata closed it off to profiteers and turned it into a military harbor. Lion's Arch is a ruined lump of waterlogged rocks. We can't exactly ask them to swim to shore. And anyway, they could be useful. Useful? Sycox snorted rudely. An ocean wind ruffled his tawny fur about his shoulders. She's pretty, more like. Stung, Kobaya flattened a card into the pile with a snap. Considering our engine's near dead, having a wind elementalist on board is useful. And I certainly wouldn't say Virid is pretty. Did you mean to play that one? Matcha asked curiously, reaching to snatch Kobaya's discard into her own hand. The captain stared down at the pile, then at his hand, and blanched as Masha laid out a full set of cards one by one with a smirk. Ha! I've got an ackle. That's 15 points. She tittered in delight, rainbow braids flicking back and forth like striking serpents. Sycox and Kobaya groaned. Again, Kobaya muttered. You make up the rules as we go along, don't you, Matcha? I'll have you know that Akeldenth is an old and established Asuran diversion played by my people for more than 700 years. Just because you don't understand the rules doesn't mean they don't exist. Now, mark down my score. She poked Sycox in the ribs. The engineer sighed and wrote the number on the deck with a bit of charcoal. We need provisions, supplies, fuel for the engine. We used most of our coal getting out of Port Stalwart. If they catch up to us now, we're at the mercy of the wind. The Shar shuddered as if this were a nearly unthinkable prospect. Yeah, but to get any of that, we need gold. We can't just send lifeboats to the shore and tell the men to chop up some wood. Kobaya made a sweeping gesture toward the distant shore. That's the Maguma jungle out there. It'd eat them alive. It's full of scale. Harpies, too. You're being unimaginative, Colby. Matcha's black eyes glittered. My people live in that jungle. It's got mantid, trolls, giant spiders, wild devourers, and worst of all, skrit. I hope anyone who goes ashore knows which plants are flesh-eaters. Flesh-eating plants? Sycox stared at Masha with new respect. That sounds like a good fight. Kobaya elbowed the Char. Stop thinking about how much fun it would be and play a card already. Sycox did, with a grumble, and the captain continued. We can't send the crew into the Maguma. So what are our other options? Well, Matcha said thoughtfully, we could go to Radasum and buy what we need. Might be able to put the passengers ashore there, too. But Kobaya could hear the hesitation in her voice. Nothing in Reta Sum is free. If you don't have silver and gold, you might as well not even bother docking. You'll find yourself in debt up to your eyeballs faster than you can say wharfmaster. But if you've got money... She peered at him thoughtfully, and he found himself covering his cards. You could use the Asura gates to go anywhere in the world. Anywhere there's a gate, of course. But the gates go to the Black Citadel, not that Hengst would go to the Char capital, and even Divinity's Reach, so I've heard. Divinity's Reach? Sycox cocked his head. Where's that? It's a new human city. Isaiah's voice startled them. She had approached from the other side of the mast. As she spoke, she leaned against it and watched their game progress. I'm surprised you've heard of it, little one. The project's only a few years old and still only half built. King Bade moved to Shaymore after. Lion's Arch was lost, and now they're designing a city on the cliffs near Lake Regent. When they finish, it'll be the new capital of Kriata. Matcha's ears twitched warningly, but amazingly, the Asura kept a civil tongue. Bade commissioned an Asura gate for his city, which is how I know. He's planning to make it a hub of trade. Makes sense. The sea's crawling with undead, and Lion's Arch is full of water. How else are you going to get trade through? But anyway, if we can get you three to Reta Sum, we can get you home. She squinted up at Isaiah and gave a little smile. If that is your home? It's not, the human woman replied tersely. But until I have a ship of my own, it'll do. Sycox played a card, exchanging it for another. Kobaya's turn was next, and he carefully placed a card on the pile, setting 4 more in front of him in a duplication of Masha's play. I have an ACL, right? The Asura inspected his sequence. No, you have a half ACL. It's only worth 6. See how 2 of your cards are red, and all of mine are black? That's the difference between a full ACL and a half. Still, it's not a bad play for a beginner. 6 points for you. She tapped Sycox's arm. Write it down. The Shar scribbled on the deck again, looking pleased with himself. So, we need to find gold and silver. We don't have the money to dock, much less to send IA and her men anywhere. Where are we going to get that kind of coin? Well, Matcha paused, twirling her next card in her hand thoughtfully. King Bade could give it to us. Isay laughed out loud. The King of Kriata? Pay for my passage? Either you underestimate the size of the human race, Matcha, or you overestimate my political clout. I'm loyal to the Kriatan throne, but the king doesn't know me from a stone in his shoe. Bade doesn't have to know you, and we don't have to know him. The only thing we have to know is the shipping route he's using. Kobaya raised an eyebrow. You're getting at something, Matcha. Out with it. Remember how I said he commissioned a magical gate for that new city? Matcha looked smug. As she talked, Virid and Hengst approached from the bow of the ship, curious as to the nature of the conversation. My brother's wife's old college friend's roommate was on the crew that built the gate in Divinity's Reach. And I saw him while we were in Port Stalwart. He said that the gate won't be ready for a few months yet, but the Asura wanted a down payment. King Bade sending a hunk of gold to the colleges of Ratasum via a ship out of Port Noble. Out of Port Noble? Kobaya did some quick figuring in his head. That means they'll be traveling down the Maguma shore, right past where we're sailing now. Isay looked skeptical, but Hengst brightened. Sack the king's ship? He said, rolling his shoulders as if in anticipation of a fight. I'm all for that. At last, Sycox rumbled grumpily. Something we agree on. Isay fixed her gaze on Hengst with a chuckle. I'd thought you'd refuse, since you're such a stalwart son of Ascalon. Hengst chuckled smugly. I'm of the noble lineage of Ascalon, not Kriata, Captain. You folk may consider them the same, but I certainly do not. Kriata refused to send troops to help King Adalburn when the Char beasts attacked my homeland. I've nothing against taking gold from Kriata. Unless he's helping me retake my country, the king of Kriata can kiss Grenth's boots for all I care. To the fore, O sons of ASCAP, he sang patriotically. Isay looked thoughtful, but Sycox refused to be silent. Beasts, he growled, all 4 ears flicking back behind his curled horns. Watch your words, Ascalonian, or you'll be eating them with a spoon. With a dark chuckle, Henst crossed his arms and leaned against the mast. It's not my words you should be watchful of, Char. One hand fell casually to the hilt of the sword at his waist. Before the argument could escalate, Kobaya broke in. This ship bearing the king's gold. Do we know anything about it? I bet she does, Matcha said, gesturing at Isay with a handful of cards. I can make an educated guess, Isay said with a frown. King Bade would use the Salma's Grace. It's his largest and most well-armed ship of the line. Not to disparage your pinnace, but I doubt the Pride could match her in a fight, even if we had the speed to overtake her. Won't even be able to do that without the engine. Sycox drew a card from the deck, grumbling under his breath before he played another on the discard pile. Matcha squealed happily, snatching it up, and the tawny Char sighed. We'd have to be in the ship's path before she saw us, and even then we'd only catch her if we could cut off her wind. I can bring the wind, or take it away. Vera tilted his head thoughtfully. But I am no oracle. I cannot predict where the Salma's Grace will be. That's how Bade protects his vessels. Isay looked frustrated. This is a terrible idea. The king's ships don't sail along the coastline. They sail to the wreckage of the Ring of Fire Islands and use an astrolabe to make their way north from there. We'd never find them. Matcha played another row of cards. Ackle again. Right. 15 points. Sycox began to scribble. 18.75, actually. The Shar huffed in surprise as Matcha preened. The second one's worth 25% more. If I had a denth as well, it would have been an additional 5 times the inceptor of the highest card on the table. The Char's claws tightened around the charcoal stick, cracking it between his fingers. Glaring at her, he growled, I think I'm starting to figure out how your little game works, Asura. How many points do I get if I stab you? Matcha ignored him. You know, Kobaya. She drew enough cards to fill her hand before passing the turn. The fact that an astrolabe can direct us only north and south of the sun's rising is terribly inefficient. Inefficient? Henst sneered. I suppose you can just wave away more than 600 years of sailor's wisdom in an instant and come up with something better? Matcha stiffened at the challenge, snapping her cards together in her hand and glaring at the dark-haired sailor. I'm a genius-ranked member of the esteemed College of Dynamics, she retorted. Of course I can. Kobaya stopped shuffling, looking up from the brightly painted cards. Even quick-witted Isay took a second glance at the Asura, doubt written across her face. Henst was the first to speak. Oh, he asked mockingly. Next you'll tell us that you're the queen of Radasum. Radasum is far too enlightened to practice primitive lineage-based feudalism, you rot-witted skelk. The colleges of Radasum are the premier educational facilities in Tyria. An Asura works all her young life to create an invention good enough to be accepted to one of the colleges, much less graduate with genius-ranked honors. This is exactly what I'm talking about. She smoothed down her braids and sniffed disparagingly. The reason humans have lost every significant battle with the Char in the last 100 years isn't because they're tougher than you. It's because they're smarter than you. They have training, education, murder drills, and combat instruction. They keep learning while you stupid humans sit on your butts and pray. Before Henst could respond, Matcha pressed on, her voice as vibrant and sharp as the feathers woven into her multicolored braids. Consider this, Tyria has 1 sun and 1 moon, you monolithic moron. We measure latitude, or the distance north and south, by measuring the point of the sun's rise on the horizon with an astrolabe. So, you addle-pated, mouth-breathing digestive tract on legs. It stands to reason that we should be able to determine our east-west position by the movement of the moon, if we can find the right measuring stick. The Asura's smirk contained as much pleasure as anger, and her black eyes flashed in joy. Sycox frowned. That doesn't make sense. They move the same dirt. Shh. Kobaya elbowed him into silence. Don't interrupt her. She's on a roll. Putting down her cards, the Asura rose to face Hengst, jamming her hands onto her hips, as if she were a colossus straddling the sea. I have to admit that it was a human who gave me the idea, though clearly a human with more brain cells to rub together than the ones you have inhabiting the cavernous, lonely space between your obviously vestigial ears. He told me something elementary that changed my perspective. She turned to Vired. Isn't that right? Once we take into account the factors that misalign the sigil's plane, we can predict a pattern along that plane. Vera nodded absently. So shut your festering blister of a mouth, you earless, witless, clay-brained blowhard. Hands on her hips, she glared at Hengst as if defying him to prove her wrong. Infuriated at the Asura's mocking tone, Hengst clenched his sword hilts, drawing them free of their scabbards with a ringing tone. As Sycox leveled a flintlock pistol inches from Hengst's left cheek. That's my friend you're threatening, mouse, the Char growled blackly. Now, I recommend you put your weapons down and let the little lady finish. Or didn't your Ascalonian grandfather teach you how to be polite? Outmaneuvered, Hengst let his weapons slide back into their scabbards and lowered his hands. Sycox nodded for Matcha to continue. Time. The Asura narrowed her eyes like a preening cat. Blue sleeves fluttered as she crossed her arms over her chest, and her hair swayed with the rocking movement of the pride. The wind rippled in the sails, and the ocean lapped playfully against the side of the clipper. Clearly unhappy with Hengst's treatment, Isay nevertheless prodded Masha with, Time? Time! 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 Matcha leapt into the air, arms raised above her head and braids flying. That's the secret, don't you get it? That was the clue I needed to revolutionize navigational theory. As simple as that. See, once you've chosen a central meridian radisum, of course, the rest is just a matter of counting the ticking clock back and forth from that cardinal point. Observation of altitude of celestial bodies is useful only if it is measurable. As we chase the moon across the sky, east to west, we alter our own time scale on Tyria. All I had to do was discover a way to measure time irregardless of the sun. That's not a real Hengst began. The hammer of Sycox's gun clicked back. Isay bristled. Go on. Do go on, the Ascalonian said through gritted teeth. Kobaya stepped to Sycox's shoulder, slowly placing his hand on the Char's outstretched weapon. Gently, Kobaya pushed the gun's muzzle toward the floor. Tell us what you've figured out, Matcha. Sycox sighed in resignation and pushed the pistol back into his belt. It's probably too complex for your limited minds, but I'll explain anyway. Matcha feigned annoyance. Between my amazing scientific discovery and Isay's knowledge of the tides, I believe that I can plot the singular course of the Salma's grace through the shoals of the Ring of Fire Islands. A smile lit up Kobaya's face. You're a genius, Matcha. Council certified, she said, preening. Do we know when the Salma's grace left Port Noble? Kobaya asked, tossing his handful of cards into the discard pile. 6 days ago. Or so said my brother's wife's old college friend's roommate, she mused sorrowfully. Right before the zombies ate him. Then we make for the Ring of Fire Islands and lay a trap for the Salma's grace. Kobaya reached for Masha's shoulders, nearly lifting her from the deck. You're sure you can do this? She grinned in delight. I can. The question is whether she can. The Asura jerked her thumb at Isai. Even with my invention, we need to know the tides, or the reefs and wreckage of the Ring of Fire Islands will impale the Pride long before we see the Salma's grace. That's another reason they sail there. All eyes turned to Isai. The dark-haired pirate woman stood near her crewman, unable to stop the argument between Hengst and Sycox, but clearly displeased by its tone. Now that everyone was staring at her, she narrowed her eyes and set her shoulders as if going into battle. Kobaya set Matcha down. "What's wrong, Isae?" "It's the king's ship." Kobaya scoffed in amusement. "Oh, come on. Bade has enough money to build a city and buy an Asura gate. He can afford to lose one ship full of gold." "Simon, Isae." "You said you knew the tides," he coaxed her with a smile. "Here's your chance to prove it." Kobaya's smile faded as Ia shook her head and looked down. "I don't think I can do this," she sighed. "What?" Kobaya frowned. "Don't doubt yourself." "Of course you can." "I don't doubt anything, Kobaya." Isai fiercely raised her eyes to meet his. "I can't attack the king of Kriada. I'm Kriadan. It's my nation. The people have been through enough already, and I can't add to their suffering by stealing from them." "The people won't miss that gold, Miss High and Mighty," Matcha grumbled. "It's been in the king's vaults for years." Matcha's right. "And technically, we're stealing it from the Asura, not from King Bade. It's taxed from the people, and it'll be the people who get taxed again to replace it." "Look, Isae." Kobaya stepped closer. He didn't like the pain in her eyes, but she had to see this was the only way. "We can find." Before he could take her hand, Hengst shoved himself between them. "Don't touch her," he said darkly. Still angry from the Asura's upbraiding, he growled. "Isai said she doesn't want to do it. So back off." Kobaya stepped back, anger lighting in his blue eyes. Isai shoved Hengst away with a flash of anger. "I can defend myself, thanks." The black-haired Ascalonian didn't step back, but instead continued to stare daggers at Kobaya. Half-turning, Kobaya shrugged as if the offense was of no importance, but instead of stepping away, he rocked on the balls of his feet and shot back like a recoiling wave. He lashed out fiercely, cracking the Ascalonian's cheek with a blow that knocked the sailor full to the ground. Hengst landed hard, cursing, swords clattering to the deck. A trickle of blood ran from a split along his cheekbone. "Attaboy, Colby," Sycox chortled. "Never tell me what to do on my own ship, Hengst." Kobaya's voice was as cold as the waters of Ore. "Next time you won't survive it." Glowering, Isai bent down and took Hengst's arm. He shook her off, snatching up his swords and glaring at Kobaya. She whispered something low and urgent, and Hengst's movements slowed. He nodded, allowing her to help him stand as he shoved his swords back into their scabbards with a sullen thrust. With a sigh, Virad moved to join them, steepling his fingers and whispering quietly to Isai. Angry that she'd sided with Hengst, Kobaya crossed his arms and glared at all of them. "You want off this ship? Then you do what I tell you. I don't care two figs about the king of Kriada, his people, or the Asura in Rada Sum. I care about this ship and this crew, and while you're aboard, you're going to put them in front of any other loyalties. While you're on the Pride, you take orders, and you do as you're told. If you don't like it, you can swim home." He met Hengst's murderous stare unflinchingly. Turning to Isai, Kobaya's tone softened. "We get the money, you get your freedom." She kept her hand on Hengst's arm and didn't meet Kobaya's eyes. Hurt, Kobaya lost his patience and snapped, "Fine. You heard me. Now get to work."